Hey guys, so I am finally able to sit down and answer some of the questions that you have sent me. For those of you who would like guidance with issues pertaining to detox, fasting, or emotional healing, you can email them to me at detoxcoachivanna@gmail.com. The email is also listed in the description below the video. Please be sure to write video questions in the subject line, provide your age and biological sex, and include as much detail as possible when describing your issues. If you don't want your name mentioned on YouTube, then provide a pseudonym. I will do my best to answer as many questions as possible when I have some time available. If you have a pressing, time-sensitive issue, I recommend scheduling a consult because it may be a while before I get another opportunity to record a video. Most of these questions were submitted as long as 2 months ago. And since my time is so limited outside of private consultations, this video format is the only way that I can currently address requests for help while reaching the greatest number of people. So please don't get upset if you don't get a response from me via Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get down to business. Instead of answering your questions in the order they were received, I have tried grouping them together by topic so that answers build on each other and provide a more cohesive, complete picture. So the first question is from B, and she writes, I have 3 bottom front teeth where the gums have receded and the roots are exposed. They have a brown coating on the roots, which the dentist said is plaque. She explained to me that it is necessary to have them filled, as the bacteria is going to eat away at them, and then the teeth will crumble and fall off, and then I will need root canals. As you can imagine, this is scaring me. Part of me wants her to just fix them so I don't have to worry anymore, and another part hopes that my body will fix everything. I know that once the fillings are there, my body can't fix it. But with my age of 67 and having had radiation treatments aimed at my neck, lower jaw, and saliva glands, having had lymph nodes removed from my neck, what would you advise for me? I see the root, especially on one tooth in the center, getting smaller than the tooth. The process of decay is happening. The root part is brown. I thought it was stained from the dragon's blood tincture I've put on it, but the dentist said it is decay. The root is much softer than the tooth. Anyway, here's my question if you're still taking them. If the dentist recommends filling 3 lower center teeth at the gum line that has receded and roots are exposed and brown in color and seem to be shrinking smaller than the tooth itself, would you recommend having her fill them to save the teeth, or would this be a big mistake? Thank you for any help you can provide. I hope all is well with you. All right, B. As I read this, I can actually feel your angst and distress about the whole situation. The problem is that when we are stressed out, anxious, or fearful, we're activating the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system that puts us in the fight or flight mode, which is characterized by the release of inflammatory hormones. Sympathetic dominance places a higher demand on the heart and increases muscular tension. The problem is that in the fight or flight mode, both digestion and elimination are automatically shut down by necessity. Because you can't run away from a bear or fight off a lion in the middle of having a bowel movement. And when there is no elimination, there is no detoxification. And if there is no detoxification, no healing or repair or rebuilding is happening because regeneration cannot occur in an acidic medium. So, it is very important to understand that healing can only happen in the parasympathetic state, which is also known as the rest and digest mode, conducive to the housekeeping functions of the body. Therefore, the more you remain in the sympathetic state, the higher the acidosis and the greater the wear and tear on your body. So the more you stress about your teeth, the more they're going to deteriorate. In fact, it has been observed during lab studies that emotional distress causes our mitochondria, which are the cell's powerhouses, to dump their DNA into the bloodstream, which the body perceives as foreign invaders, much like viruses or bacteria, thus causing it to initiate an inflammatory response by going into the attack mode. This, of course, is detrimental in a couple of ways. One, the mitochondria, which are the main producers of ATP or adenosine triphosphate, are being damaged. And two, this causes the cytokine storm that compromises the entire system, giving rise to diseases. Mitochondrial damage has also been directly linked to aging and shorter lifespan. Interestingly enough, in animal studies, this manifested in a very peculiar way, specifically as bone and hair loss. So by stressing out and obsessively worrying about your teeth, you're actually undercutting yourself and sabotaging your healing on many different levels. The more acidic you are, the more calcium you're going to lose, while at the same time preventing this calcium from being replaced. Stress and anxiety are the number one reasons why people plateau and stagnate on detox. So the most important thing you have to do is relax and shift into the parasympathetic mode. You can do this by reframing your mindset, meditation, taking up an enjoyable hobby, or vagal stimulation. As far as whether or not you should have your teeth filled, it depends. My personal rule of thumb for me is that unless I am in pain, I leave it alone and keep going with my detox and dental protocols. I discussed these in detail in the webinar I did on tooth problems, and that video is available on my channel. Look at it this way. Yes, it is true that your teeth may deteriorate further and lose more structure by not getting a filling, but they will also necessarily lose more structure by getting the filling, because the dentist is going to have to remove some of that structure in the process. Now, I do understand the vanity aspect of this and the impact that it may have on your emotional state. That's why I think that it may actually help you to have these cavities filled, because it will alleviate some stress and help you relax, thus allowing you to get back into the healing mode. So you're going to have to assess your personal cost to benefit ratio with respect to this situation. And considering the severity of your condition as a whole and everything you're dealing with in terms of the fallout from the radiation and the lymph node removal, it may be a very long road before you get to the place of tooth regeneration, by which time you could possibly lose those teeth. So if it gives you more confidence and a greater peace of mind, then go ahead and get the fillings. Besides, if the tooth is too damaged, then the only way the body can fix it is by getting rid of it and then growing a brand new one. But to get to that level of regeneration, you'll have to go beyond just cleansing the body and removal of stored waste. You're going to have to get into the genetic programming of cells, which in my view is still a long way away. So when it comes to teeth, it's not such a cut and dry issue, because you have to weigh the particulars of each case individually. If you do choose to get your teeth filled, then make sure that you're not getting the amalgam type of material that contains metals. And if you need help with your anxiety or emotions in general, you can always schedule time with me and I'll be happy to help you with that. Next up, we have Revital. Hi, Ivana, how are you? Regarding the issue of consuming all the essential vitamins and minerals. I know that inorganic supplements are inefficient and even harmful, but I also know that you're not very enthusiastic about nuts and seeds, which are rich with nutrients. So are fruits and vegetables and greens enough, or should we consume nuts and seeds in moderation? What is the problem with nuts and seeds? And what are the most recommended fruits and vegetables? Could you please be specific about the advantages and disadvantages of common vegetables, i.e. carrots, peppers, zucchini, pumpkin, sweet potato, peas, corn, mushrooms, eaten raw, of course, soaked seed, nuts, and grains. In short, what should a recommended raw vegan diet include and what not? And could you please discuss in detail more recommended vegetables and nuts and seeds on the raw vegan lifestyle? For example, I remember you also don't consider onions and garlic to be very good. In addition, please discuss the reasons why and why not to eat certain things. Thanks very much, Revital. So, first let's talk about nuts and seeds. Nuts are essentially seeds that the trees bear in order to propagate their species. Because of this, all nuts and seeds contain enzyme inhibitors. This, of course, is by design, so that the integrity and the genetic blueprint of the plant is preserved, even in the most severe conditions, keeping that seed in the state of suspended animation until the perfect time and the circumstances come along, which are favorable for the seed to be activated and germinated. And the same goes for grains and legumes, which is why we call nuts, seeds, grains, and beans dormant foods. Now, the thing about enzyme inhibitors is that they prevent these foods from being broken down and digested, which puts an undue burden on the pancreas. Not only that, but if you're mixing nuts with other foods, those enzyme inhibitors will also prevent you from digesting and absorbing nutrients from anything else that you might be eating. In other words, it doesn't matter what kind of nutrition nuts may contain if the body cannot use it. In addition to these enzyme inhibitors, nuts, beans, grains, and seeds also contain phytic acid, which is a well-known anti-nutrient. And the reason it's called an anti-nutrient is that it binds to minerals such as calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, chromium, and manganese, and blocks their absorption. So phytic acid literally leaches precious minerals from your body, causing bone, tooth, and connective tissue loss. Soaking nuts and seeds diminishes both the enzyme inhibitors and the phytic acid, but it does not remove them completely. The only way to get rid of these substances is by sprouting. And that's why you might see squirrels bury their nuts and seeds for a while before digging them up and eating them. Grains, lentils, beans, soybeans, peas, and peanuts are even worse because in addition to phytic acid, they also contain lectins and saponins, which are another class of antinutrients. Lectins are proteins that bind to carbohydrates. They resist being broken down in the gut and remain stable in an acidic environment. Aside from blocking the absorption of minerals, some types of lectins can also cause red blood cells to clump together. And they also damage the intestinal lining by binding to the villi and causing inflammation. The only sure way to get rid of these compounds is to soak grains and then to thoroughly cook them. The problem with this is that while you are getting rid of the harmful chemicals, you're also obliterating any and all valuable nutrients, which is why in the final analysis, grains and legumes are absolutely worthless when it comes to providing any benefit for the body. Not only that, but their metabolic breakdown creates acid ash, and that's why they are not suitable for human consumption. Lectins are also present in the nightshades, which are a separate category of plants that are high in naturally occurring pesticides like solanine, produced by the nightshades as a defense mechanism to protect themselves from being eaten both by bugs and humans. So in addition to those no-good lectins that are present in nightshades, you also have the pesticides, such as alkaloids and glycoalkaloids. Both are toxic, though their impact on the body is a bit different. Alkaloids can have a drug-like effect, and prime examples of these are caffeine, nicotine, and morphine. Glycoalkaloids, on the other hand, bind to the cholesterol in the cell wall with the goal of damaging the cell membrane. Cholesterol is what fortifies the cell walls by giving our cells structure. The purpose of cholesterol is to maintain the integrity of the cellular membranes so that they are less permeable to invaders that might attempt to enter the cell and cause damage. Without cholesterol, our cells would be weak and shapeless, and we would look pretty much like formless blobs of jello. And when these glycoalkaloids go after the cholesterol in our cells may rupture and leak, causing all kinds of issues. What makes things even worse is that it can take the body more than a day to clear glycoalkaloids from the system. So if you are consuming nightshades on a daily basis, you are creating a constant toxic load that is weakening the body on the cellular level and increasing the burden on the system that now is struggling to remove these toxic chemicals. Tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, all the peppers, including cayenne, tomatillos, pimentos, goji berries, okra, ground cherries, and tobacco all belong to the nightshade family. Now, if you recall earlier, I said that nicotine is an alkaloid, and of course everyone knows that it's present in tobacco. But what you might not know is that all nightshades contain nicotine, albeit in smaller quantities than are found in tobacco. I don't know if this can make nightshades addictive, and some people seem to think so, but my advice is that if you must have some nightshades, eat them very sparingly, especially if you suffer from any inflammatory conditions like psoriasis or arthritis. Tomatoes are notorious for causing painful flare-ups that are often accompanied by significant swelling. And I have also experienced this with eggplant, so use your own judgment. I also mentioned caffeine as being one of the alkaloids. So I want to clarify that even though both coffee and cacao contain alkaloids, they do not belong to the nightshade family. So that's just a side note on that. Another group of foods that should be eaten in moderation are the so-called goitrogenic plants. These are broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, radishes, bok choy, mustard greens, soy, turnips, spinach, sweet potatoes, pine nuts, kohlrabi, and rutabagas. The name goitrogenic stems from goiter and means that these cruciferous plants can negatively impact the thyroid by inhibiting the body's ability to utilize iodine. In short, goitrogens block the process by which iodine is incorporated into the thyroid hormones. So, if you like to eat cruciferous veggies and sweet potatoes, be sure to include iodine-rich foods in your diet, like kelp, bladderwrack, or Irish moss. However, I have also read that if you have a weak thyroid and then compound it with a diet that's heavy in goitrogens, then supplemental iodine may be insufficient to compensate for the resulting disruption of iodine utilization. But I don't know this to be 100% accurate. Another problem with the cruciferous vegetables is that they are high in sulfur, which can be a real problem if you already hold toxic sulfur deposits from antibiotics and other sulfur drugs, because sulfur molecules bind to each other regardless of their source. This means that eating sulfur-rich foods will exacerbate your underlying problem and make toxic sulfur deposits harder to remove. Not to mention that you'll also experience bloating, gas, swelling, and this is especially the case if you have methylation issues. And of course, sulfur is an aphrodisiac for candida, so it's going to make your fungal problems worse. And this is why I maintain that the ideal diet for humans is mainly fruitarian. I did a whole webinar on this explaining that diet is species specific, and I do recommend that you watch that video, which is available on my channel. Some plants that most people consider to be vegetables are actually fruits. These are cucumbers, avocado, tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, all the squashes and pumpkins, eggplants, string beans, okra, peas, sweet corn, and olives. Just because they're fruits, it doesn't mean that they should be eaten in unlimited quantities. As you already know, many of them are nightshades. Peas and corn, aside from phytic acid, contain enzyme inhibitors that block trypsin, which is the enzyme responsible for breaking down amino acids arginine and lysine. And if you've ever eaten corn, then you know that it does not get digested because you can see it come out in the toilet, pretty much unchanged. And so the reason for this is the aforementioned enzyme inhibitors. Avocado. Love avocado, but it is mildly mucus forming due to its fat content. Now, Rivital also mentioned some other foods in her question like onions, garlic, mushrooms, and carrots. I have no problem with carrots outside of detox. If you're not detoxing, have at 'em. But if you are detoxing, they will slow things down because they're too starchy. Sweet potatoes are, I suppose, okay raw in moderation, even though they are goitrogenic. And I do know people who eat them raw, though I personally never tried them this way because it's just not my jam. What's important is that you do not bake your sweet potatoes because high temperatures used to bake, roast, fry, and so on create a chemical called acrylamide, which is a cancer-causing agent. So if you have to cook it, then I suggest that you steam it or boil it. What else? Garlic and onions. Okay, so both garlic and onion are high in sulfur. They're also very acidic and mucus forming, and Arnold Ehret referred to them as toxics. I recently saw a video of some joker on Instagram shoving cloves of garlic up his nose, which of course resulted in a bunch of mucus coming out. But this was no detox because the mucus was clear, which means that it's newly created. And of course, it's common knowledge that onions are highly irritating to the mucosa because we cry when we peel or cut them. As far as mushrooms, I do like mushrooms, even though they are fungi. Certain mushrooms have excellent medicinal properties like lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, and shiitake. I'd say that if you're not sure about specific plants and whether or not they're good to eat, I would refer you to the list of mucusless foods by Arnold Ehrt. So I hope this answers your question, Revital. Next up is Karen, who's asking, why do you think that Dr. Filanov is concerned with breaking dry fasts with juice or coconut water due to their effects on the pancreas? What exactly is this effect on the pancreas? Could you explain to us what the pancreas is, its job, and how it works with the rest of our organs and glands, please? While Filanov isn't entirely wrong about not breaking an extended dry fast with coconut water or fruit juice, it is not for the reasons that he states. I don't see this as a pancreas-related issue at all. Pancreas is a digestive organ that secretes amylase, protease, and lipase, which are the enzymes needed to break down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, respectively. Hydrochloric acid is the first enzymatic agent deployed in the initial stages of digestion to break up the larger food particles in the stomach into chyme. And once the food has been tenderized by HCl, it then moves into the duodenum, where the pancreas releases bicarbonate to neutralize the hydrochloric acid. And this is also where bile is secreted by the liver to emulsify the fats, and the pancreatic enzymes are deployed to finish the job. This means that it doesn't matter if you're drinking fruit or vegetable juice, or if you're eating pasta, steak, or cheese. The pancreas is going to be involved regardless. Now, another thing that the pancreas does is that it secretes insulin, which is a carrier hormone that assists in transporting glucose through the cell wall. And this is where so many people get it wrong. They believe that fruit, being sweeter than vegetables, destabilizes blood sugar and puts an additional stress on the pancreas by making it pump out insulin. But this is completely false. Here's what you need to understand about simple sugars. Fruits and vegetables contain both glucose and fructose. But in fruits, the ratio is slightly higher in favor of fructose. Fructose does not invoke insulin production because it can enter the cell wall directly. Only glucose requires insulin for transport. So that's fallacy number one in Filanov's assertion. Furthermore, fructose does not raise blood sugar in any meaningful way. Fructose has the glycemic index of 23 to 25 depending on your sources, whereas the glycemic index of glucose is 100. So, if anything, digesting vegetable matter places a significantly greater demand on the pancreas, 4 times higher to be exact, than digesting fruit juices. That being said, it is indeed better to break your long dry fast with a vegetable juice than a fruit one. And here's why. When we are breaking a dry fast, we want to gently ease the body into the exogenous feeding mode by slowly and gradually turning on both the digestion and elimination. The first problem with fruit juice is that it gets absorbed very quickly in the small intestine, and it does not travel the entire length of the GI tract. And those of you who had done some long juice feasts probably noticed that you don't have bowel movements when drinking exclusively fruit juices. So by breaking the fast with a fruit juice, you're only partially reactivating your GI tract and thus only doing half the job. Now, the other problem with fruit is that fructose is a highly volatile sugar. And this is what makes fruit so good at mobilizing lymph and breaking up stagnation. But it can be as much as 30 times more reactive than glucose, which makes it too destabilizing and too stimulating. And therefore, this can be really jarring to the system that's been in a self-contained endogenous state. If you were to compare the body to a car that runs on manual transmission, drinking fruit juice can be like abruptly shifting from the third gear into the first. And if you've ever driven a stick, then you know that that is not a smooth transition. And what ends up happening is that the entire mechanism stalls. So a similar thing happens with the body. Another thing to consider is that you don't want to break your fast with something that's really delicious, because it can stimulate the addicted glutton so many have inside us, thus causing us to overeat and inevitably overburden the system that is simply not ready for it. And that's why Satmarga recommends breaking a long dry fast with a raw cabbage smoothie, because, as he says, it doesn't exactly excite the taste buds. However, if you have sulfur issues, I would advise against cabbage specifically. Cucumber juice or a thin cucumber smoothie is a much better alternative, in my opinion. And plus, it's really hydrating. But if you're going to do a cucumber smoothie, then be sure to remove the skin first, so that way it's easier to digest. Next question is from Pamela, who says, kindly discuss any solutions for halitosis and obesity. First, let's talk about fat and what it is. Fat consists primarily of sugar and water. Now, the body has a finite number of fat cells. This means that you don't create more fat cells when you gain weight. Instead, what happens is that the existing fat cells simply expand in size. When we eat, the body only needs and can use a certain limited amount of energy at any given time. Any surplus is going to be stored in the liver in the form of glycogen. Now, people mistakenly think that only eating sugar like fruits or cakes and donuts results in sugar loading in the liver, but this is entirely false. Even if you eat a big piece of steak, the body is going to store the surplus as glycogen, because all complex protein chains must first be converted into carbohydrates through the process of deamination, because cells can only use sugar for energy. And all carbs are sugars, whether you're talking about grains, potatoes, or beans. These, of course, would be complex sugars like di and polysaccharides, which are way more concentrated than the simple fructose and glucose that are found in fruits and vegetables. Here's a little chemistry lesson. If you look at this little graphic, you're going to see that carbohydrates are chemically made up of the atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins are also made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, with an additional atom of nitrogen. So the only difference between a carbohydrate and a protein is that the protein molecule also contains nitrogen. during the breakdown of proteins in the liver, a process called deamination occurs. And this is nothing more than the removal of that nitrogen component from the amino acids. So when you take the nitrogen out, what you're left with is a carbohydrate. And here's an interesting side note for those who are obsessed with protein consumption or who are worried that they cannot get enough of it on a raw fruitarian diet. We know that nitrogen is used in the body to synthesize proteins that make up our physical structure. And as I already explained, the body can do this very easily by combining a carbohydrate molecule with nitrogen. What you should also know is that the air we breathe is 78% nitrogen. Therefore, we get plenty of nitrogen just by breathing. And this nitrogen is more than enough to synthesize proteins needed for hormones, muscle growth, and various immune and brain functions. Another thing you should know is that outside of nitrogen, the composition of the air we breathe also contains 21% oxygen and about 1% each of carbon and hydrogen, which are all the basic components that make up both the carbohydrates and the proteins. This means that the body can literally make proteins and carbs out of thin air. And this may very well explain why some people, known as breatharians, can live without food and water. So you really don't need to worry about being protein deficient on an all-plant diet. But let's circle back around to the excess energy storage and weight gain. It doesn't matter if you're eating complex proteins, starches, or simple sugars, because regardless of what you eat, eating more than the body can utilize will inevitably result in liver glycogen loading. And since liver has a limited, finite storage capacity, if you're consuming more than can be stored in the liver is then forced to convert that excess glycogen into triglycerides, which are then shuttled into our fatty tissue, making it expand. Now, you might know that fat-soluble vitamins K, D, A, and E are stored in the adipose tissue. But another thing that the body stores in the adipose is toxic matter. And this is done in an effort to keep those poisons away from the vital organs, and in this way to protect them from damage as much as possible. Another thing that the body does when it's trying to insulate itself from the damaging toxins is that it brings water, which is a solvent, to the affected areas in order to dissolve and dilute the corrosive acidic waste so that it can be flushed out. And bringing more water into the adipose tissue causes it to inflate, swell up, and bulk up in size. And this uneven water distribution is what gives fat that bumpy, uneven appearance that we call cellulite. So this, in a nutshell, is how a person gains weight and puts on fat. So the bottom line is that if you're obese, then either you're consuming way too much food, more than the body can process and utilize, or you're consuming the type of processed non-food products like macaroni and cheese, meats, and cereals that are neither use nor ornament because they're not biocompatible. And if on top of eating junk that the body doesn't know what to do with, your elimination is compromised, then you're really screwed, because now you're stuck holding all this garbage, and the only thing the body can do is organize it and shift it around in the way that poses the least degree of harm, relatively speaking. Another thing to consider is that for every pound of fat gained, the body generates 7 miles of new blood vessels. This means that the heart now has to pump blood an additional 7 miles, which obviously puts a significant strain on it. And that's why the more fat you have, the faster you wear out and damage the heart. In conclusion, if you are carrying a lot of fat, then you can assume that you're quite toxic and unhealthy. And halitosis is just one manifestation of that toxicity. Because if you have stuff rotting and putrefying inside you, it's going to come out of your pores and on your breath. In other words, you're going to stink. Not only that, but when your GI tract is full of garbage, you're going to attract all kinds of vermin, parasites that produce waste of their own, such as ethanol, acetaldehyde, and ammonia, just to name a few, which I imagine create a lovely bouquet of aroma of their own. You can think of this in terms of garbage disposal. Picture 2 trash cans. One is used in the office to dispose of paper products and staples or paper clips and such, while the other is used in the kitchen, where fish and meat are prepared and their byproducts are then tossed in the can, where they come together with dairy and plant waste. The office trash can sit unchanged forever and produce no odor. But imagine what the kitchen trash is going to smell like when you don't take out the garbage for a week. And so the same thing happens inside the body, especially if you are a constipated meat eater, because then you have all that rotting flesh baking inside your intestines at nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, much like roadkill in the middle of summer. So when it comes to smell, it matters a great deal what you eat and how you combine your foods. If you've ever been around horses who eat grass, then you know that their manure doesn't really stink. But if you've ever had to clean up after dogs or cats who are meat eaters, then you know that it is a much less pleasant task. So, in order to solve your problem, Pamela, 3 things have to happen. First and foremost, you have to change what you eat. Then you have to change how much you eat. And finally, you have to clean out your GI tract with the help of herbs, binders, and enemas. Of course, your thyroid and the adrenal glands also play a role in metabolism and weight control. But no matter what the state of your glands is, if you go on a raw plant diet, I promise you that the weight is going to fall off. I would also recommend that you go on an extended solid food vacation and consume nothing but fresh pressed juices for about 3 months. And then also consider dry fasting at least 2 days a week, while walking up to 10 kilometers during those fasting days. Doing that is also going to make a tremendous impact on your weight loss. The next question comes from Noah, and she's asking if I have any insights on enemas with lemon water. Sometimes I feel quite depleted for hours after doing an enema. Since it doesn't happen every time I do one, I'm wondering if it's the enema that is depleting to me. My adrenals are still quite weak with very low BP, or if what's being eliminated is the reason behind me feeling depleted. My legs also feel a bit weak right after I'm done. I appreciate any light you may be able to shed on this. Well, the primary and most obvious reason is the loss of potassium. And of course, the reason you feel depleted afterwards is that hypokalemia, meaning low potassium, causes weakness and fatigue. It causes heart palpitations as well as muscle cramps, spasms, achiness, and stiffness. And this can happen for a couple of reasons. Flushing the colon causes us to lose electrolytes. Sometimes this happens as a result of diarrhea because of food poisoning or some other digestive upset. And this also happens due to an enema or a colonic. But this potassium loss is made worse by putting acidic lemon water into the colon. And of course, how much lemon juice you use is also going to make a difference in the severity of your symptoms. For example, if I only use 1 lime or lemon per 3 quarts of water, I'm fine. But I have experimented with making the solution much more concentrated. And one time I used as many as 5 lemons. Lord Jesus, I thought I was going to die. I don't know if you know this, but enemas don't just impact the colon. They also stimulate the liver, causing it to spasm and release bile, which on the one hand is good because it's cleansing, but it can also be an overkill where too many toxins from the liver are released too quickly into the bloodstream, especially if there is a blockage in the bile duct. This, of course, can make you feel very sick, which is exactly what happened to me. I became extremely nauseous, which is the first clue that the liver is involved. Sweat started pouring out of me from head to toe, and I mean pouring. I don't even sweat like that in a sauna, and this was happening in an air-conditioned room. What this tells you is that the body had initiated a massive detox reaction through the skin because the toxic load was so high and burdensome that it could not be efficiently routed through the normal pathways of elimination. In addition to that, it also felt like all my strength had left me and I could barely move, so I just lay on the floor in the fetal position while my intestines were spasming in pain. And this continued until all of the enema solution was finally purged from my body completely, which took several evacuations because I made sure to massage and distribute that lemon water into every nook and cranny of my colon by standing on my head and then putting my legs all the way behind my head. So it didn't come out all at once. Now, such a purge of toxins, of course, is going to acidify the blood, which creates an emergency situation that the body must correct immediately. This is called metabolic acidosis. We know that optimal blood pH is 7.4, and if it drops to just 7.35, the body has officially entered into acidosis. So how does the body remedy this? To maintain the pH of 7.4, which is necessary for us to stay alive, the cells, in a way, have to sacrifice themselves. They pull protons, in other words, acids, from the blood and into their inner space. But this rebalancing comes at a cost. In exchange for taking on the protons, the cells must dump their potassium, which leads to an increase of extracellular potassium. Increased extracellular potassium causes the depolarization of the cell membrane potentials, making the cell refractory. Refractory means that the cell walls become resistant. It's almost as if the cells go into a lockdown where it's difficult to bring stuff in and get stuff out. Obviously, this poses a problem because we have just lost all this potassium and now we can't put it back in. Additionally, this depolarization of the cellular membrane results in deactivation of sodium channels, and it also impairs the function of neuromuscular, cardiac, and gastrointestinal organ systems. But perhaps the most serious consequence of this type of potassium loss is that it negatively affects the conduction of the heart and can cause ventricular fibrillation, also known as arrhythmia, which could result in a cardiac arrest. So I would be very careful with lemon juice enemas when it comes to their potency and concentration and how often you do them, because excessive use is dangerous. I would not do more than 2 per week, maybe even less than that. I would also avoid doing lemon juice enemas immediately before a dry fast, because electrolyte depletion will make your fasting that much harder, especially if you have weak adrenals. But you're going to lose electrolytes even with plain water enemas, especially considering that we mostly use filtered or distilled water, which is essentially empty water, devoid of any minerals. And that's why I will usually stay on well-strained, fresh juices for at least another couple of days before I go into my dry fast. Another thing I want to mention is that I would not recommend using supplemental potassium chloride because it's toxic to the kidneys and causes kidney stones. It will also throw your adrenals out of whack because they're the ones responsible for keeping the sodium and potassium in balance. When we are taking isolates that are not buffered and balanced by their natural counterparts, we end up ingesting too much. And too much potassium comes with a different set of problems. For instance, it can make your blood pressure plummet, it can cause heart palpitations, and it can cause breathing problems. And besides, there's absolutely no reason to supplement potassium artificially, considering that fruits and vegetables are loaded with it, especially the fruits. Doctors actually have to warn people with kidney problems to stay away from fruit because of too much potassium. So if you need potassium, go to fruits like guava, kiwi, cantaloupes, oranges, and so on. But you do have to keep in mind that potassium has to be in proper balance with sodium, which is why fresh, not bottled coconut water would be my #1 choice to restore the electrolyte balance, followed by the celery juice. I know that some people think that celery juice should be avoided right before or right after a dry fast because it contains salt, but I disagree. You see, celery has a pretty much perfect sodium to potassium ratio, 1 to 3. And ideally, your potassium level should be 3 to 5 times higher than sodium. And that's why celery juice is also a great way to bring your electrolytes into balance. Another enema question comes from Karen, and she says, I noticed that when doing enemas, I'm having random bouts of sneezing. I know you said recently that sneezing is caused by the vagus nerve. I am wondering what is causing this. Okay, if you look at this picture of the large intestine, you will see that the transverse portion runs horizontally and hangs across the top part of the abdomen. The green arrows point to the so-called flexure points, which is where the transverse colon bends into the ascending colon on the right and the descending colon on the left. So on the left, we have the splenic flexure, given its name because it hangs over the spleen, whereas on the right, we have the hepatic flexure, which means that it hangs directly over the liver. The vagus nerve runs from the medulla in our cerebellum all the way into the ascending colon, and it also covers the right portion of the transverse colon, including the hepatic flexure. If you look at this iridology chart of the right eye, you can see that the hepatic flexure is directly plugged into the medulla. And the medulla, of course, is responsible for such autonomic functions like coughing, hiccuping, and sneezing. So when you're doing enemas, you're stirring things up in your transverse colon and are tripping up the vagus nerve, which then causes a reflexive action within the medulla. And that's why your enema is making you sneeze. Now, Karen asks another question. She says, when I fall into cooked food, why does it take so long to get back on track? I aim for a weekend of having some cooked food with friends or family, and I end up yo-yoing between cooked and raw for a couple of weeks before getting back on track. Well, the simple answer is because cooked food is an addictive substance that produces dopamine and stimulates the reward centers in the brain in the same way that heroin, cocaine, alcohol, or any other drug does. Dopamine is linked to addiction because by driving our behavior towards things that activate the pleasure centers of the brain, it controls motivation, desire, and cravings. Dopamine is secreted in the brain every time we do something that gives us pleasure. This spike of dopamine then motivates us to keep doing that behavior that brought us the rewarding feeling, which includes eating certain foods. Increased dopamine produces the feelings of euphoria, bliss, and enhanced motivation and concentration. And that is why exposure to substances and activities that increase dopamine can become addictive. But interestingly, what also happens is that in response to the dopamine release, the brain weakens and sometimes even eliminates the receptors that are built to respond to dopamine, thus desensitizing us to its presence. What this means is that the next time we repeat the activity that produced that euphoric dopamine spike, it becomes much less satisfying or satiating. That's why addicts are compelled to keep seeking more and more of the substance, which in your case is cooked food. So the mechanism in the cycle that you have described here is that once a pleasurable response has been activated, the resulting dopamine release then drives you to continue eating in order to keep that intoxicating feeling going, which paradoxically decreases progressively the more you eat. And as the pleasure continues to diminish due to this weakening of receptors, you are then driven to eat more to make up for this reduced sensation. Except the more you eat, the more you continue to dilute that euphoric feeling. This increases both the discontent and the compulsion to get back into that sweet spot. So your case is really not much different from someone who gave up heroin, but then decides to go back and periodically use the drug during a holiday weekend. Do you think that the addict is just going to be able to put it down and get back to his regular drug-free life? Of course not. And that's why alcoholics can't have just one drink, because a single drink reactivates the physiological chemical dependency, leading to a binge. And even though you may have detoxed the chemical residue of the addictive substance, which diminished your desire for it, the pleasure reward pathway that was created for that food or behavior is still in place. But now it's more like an abandoned highway. So when you reintroduce the addictive substance, that pathway lights up. It's reactivated and it starts to drive the psychological and the behavioral aspect of that addiction. And that's why you get caught up in that cycle. Knowing this, it's really best to go cold turkey until you deal more comprehensively with the underlying emotional issues that make you seek out cooked food for pleasure or comfort. Ashley asks, as we get older or lose weight, the breast tissue falls from the top of the breast to the bottom, making it saggy. Does olive oil and massage really work to lift it? Droopy breasts have to do with calcium loss from connective tissue due to acidosis. And this usually happens with weight fluctuations, and especially as a result of pregnancy, where the mother loses a lot of calcium, which is used to essentially build a whole other human being. And this calcium loss is much more pronounced when the woman's body is acidic to begin with, which diminishes the density, elasticity, and resilience of the skin. The body has mechanisms in place to repair the damage and to rebuild itself. And when it comes to replenishing calcium, our thyroid and parathyroid glands produce hormones calcitonin and parathormone respectively, which are necessary for calcium utilization. But if the parathyroid and thyroid glands are genetically weak, lymphatically suppressed, or underactive due to poor signaling from the pituitary or the hypothalamus, then we're not able to replace lost calcium and to fortify the weakened skin. During pregnancy, everything expands and becomes larger, including breasts, which can increase as much as 2 cup sizes as a result of milk production. When you stretch the skin that lacks plasticity, pliability, and springiness for an extended period of time, once the milk is gone, the structurally weak breast tissue doesn't retract to its original state. And the same thing happens when our weight fluctuates due to yo-yo dieting, when the weight goes up and down too quickly. Is olive oil massage going to give you your breasts back? Probably not. But that is not to say that it's useless, because massage is good. It will stimulate lymphatic movement and open up the lymph nodes, thus helping to remove interstitial acids, which is always a good thing, as is increased blood circulation to the surrounding areas. This can provide some improvement in fullness, shape, and texture, not to mention prevent cysts and tumor formation. If I were you, I would also be taking a bone and connective tissue formula in conjunction with the parathyroid glandular to boost calcium utilization. Vitamins D and K are also instrumental in this process, so make sure that you're not deficient. Another thing I would recommend is Dr. Morse's female reproductive formula. Some women have reported firming, tightening, and even an increase in the size of their breasts as a result of taking it. And lastly, I would recommend that you nix the bra, because bras restrict the flow of blood and lymph. Going braless actually promotes collagen and elasticity by increasing the tone of the breast tissue, whereas keeping the breasts restrained and contained leads to atrophy. So bouncing and movement is actually good for your breasts. So that's all I have to say about that. The next questions are from Connie. She says, "Hi Ivana, hope all is beautiful in your world. Here are the 3 questions I hope you will be able to address in one of your video recordings. I will keep them short. Number 1, I have not found any good explanation in regard to the endocrine system and fat intake. I heard that the endocrine system can be negatively affected by not consuming any fat at all, besides the little fat that is in fruits and veggies. especially for women. John Rose, for example, suggests to consume flax oil on a solid food vacation for women. Also, what is the connection between the endocrine system and the adrenals? I completely disagree with oil consumption. Fat stops detox, period. In lab studies, presence of dietary fat in the intestinal tract has been shown to impede lymph flow and restrict the motility and contractility of lymphatic vessels. Why? Because lymph is a lipid-based fluid, and any oil we consume can only be absorbed and transported through the lymphatic system. Also keep in mind that getting your lipids from fruits like avocado, durian, or mango, which has 4 grams of fat, is very different than taking a pure and concentrated fat in the form of an oil. To put this in perspective, it takes about 20 avocados to make 250 milligrams of avocado oil. And it takes about 20 olives to get just a tablespoon of olive oil. By bringing in such a concentrated lipid product, we are changing the viscosity of our lymphatic fluid, causing it to thicken and coagulate. This means that the lymph becomes hardened and sluggish. And if we're not moving lymph, we're not detoxing. I mean, the singular, most important objective of detox is to break up and mobilize stagnant lymph. So why would we intentionally congeal it by drinking oil? Makes no sense to me. But aside from this direct impact that oil consumption has on the viscosity of lymph, there's an additional component that has to do with energy utilization and distribution. When I was detoxing rather aggressively on fruits, I would feel the lymph being pulled in my tissues, and it's an excruciatingly unpleasant sensation. The only other time I have experienced that exact type of pain in my body was during a particularly severe bout of flu. It feels like your bone marrow is being scraped out of your bones with a blunt instrument, while at the same time your muscles are being twisted and pulled. And this sensation would occur within 15 minutes of eating astringent fruit. But then one time, I took a teaspoon of guacamole, and the pain stopped almost instantly. I would say that it stopped even before the guacamole hit my stomach. Why? Because the receptors in my mouth signal to the liver and the pancreas, hey, we have fat coming in, which requires a lot of work and energy to process and digest. And so the body instantly shifted its focus from mobilizing lymph to digesting the incoming avocado. The reason for this is that the body has a finite amount of energy, which it distributes and utilizes by prioritizing various tasks in the order of importance. That's why when we're stressed or we find ourselves in a life-threatening situation, our digestion and elimination get shut down, because the body can only do so many things at once. And if we put food in our stomach, we can't just let it sit there and putrefy while the body is busy going after stagnant waste, because rotting food breeds pathogen and creates toxicity. It would be the equivalent of washing the windows while the house is on fire. So this is a first things first type of situation. Now, to confirm my conclusions, I repeated this experiment a few times just to be sure that eating even a much less concentrated amount of fat was indeed interrupting the mobilization of lymph, and I was able to replicate this effect every single time. So if you are trying to dig deep into your body to detox, you're not doing yourself any favors by consuming fats. Adrenal glands, they aren't just connected to the endocrine system, they are an integral and bona fide part of it. Adrenals produce pregnenolone, which is also known as the mother of hormones, because estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and cortisol are all made out of it. So our adrenals are the secondary site of androgen synthesis. Pregnenolone is made from cholesterol, not from fat, which is an important distinction. While cholesterol does contain fat, it's actually a lipoprotein, meaning it contains both protein and triglycerides. The protein coating is what allows cholesterol to be transported in the blood because, as you know, oil and water don't mix. The important thing to understand about cholesterol is that only 20% of it comes from the diet. The rest is made in-house not only by the liver, but every single nucleated cell in our body. The only exceptions are the platelets and the red blood cells. But even though cholesterol as an integral part of the cellular structure is produced by virtually every cell, it's the liver's job to keep track of the systemic cholesterol levels and to regulate its production via the negative feedback system. This means that if too much cholesterol is coming from the dietary sources, the body will adjust and produce less. On the other hand, if there is not enough cholesterol coming from food, the body will simply make more. What you also need to understand is that the liver is a chemical factory that's in charge of all sorts of chemical transmutations. For instance, if you consume plants rich in silica, the liver is going to take that silica and turn it into calcium. The liver also makes fat from sugar. Anytime you consume more food than can be utilized at one time, it's stored in the liver and the muscles as glycogen. When glycogen storage is maxed out, all that excess glycogen is then turned into triglycerides or plain fat. This means that you really don't need to worry about a lack of fat because the liver can make it out of sugar. What cracks me up is that the people who tell you that eating a high fruit diet is bad for you because the liver is going to turn all that fructose into fat are also the same people that are worried that you're not going to get enough fat to support your vital functions. So which is it? Because it can be both. If you're having hormonal problems due to inadequate cholesterol levels, then you have to look at your liver function because liver controls how much cholesterol is being made. But this is a more complex issue because other glands and organ systems can be also involved here. For example, thyroid hormone T3 is responsible for removing excess cholesterol from the blood. But if you have hyperthyroidism, which is characterized by excessive production of T3, it can lead to too much cholesterol being removed, thus leaving you deficient. So the bottom line is that you don't need to supplement with exogenous fat on the raw diet. The body needs fatty acids and not fats, and fruits and vegetables already contain them. What you do need to do is get your liver in order, and you should have no issues with this. Connie's second question is about dehydrated skin on the arms. My skin looks very dehydrated since I started my detox journey, and I'm afraid I caused irreversible damage to my body. through all what I've been doing. The only thing that seems helping my skin for a few hours is when I apply a very rich skin lotion. My skin soaks everything in like a sponge, but after a couple of hours, it looks dehydrated again. I started to ingest fulvic minerals and aloe vera with the hope that this will help. I do know that I have parathyroid issues. Can dehydrated, sagging skin be reversed? Have you seen skin improvements in the context of hydration and tightening yourself? Why are so many people dealing with dehydrated and sagging skin on this journey? So it does sound like you're dehydrated on the cellular level. And when something is dehydrated, it shrivels up like a prune or a raisin. You also probably know that if you soak those prunes and raisins, they're going to puff up and plump up, though they'll never be restored to their natural level of volume and firmness. And this is essentially what you're doing by applying an external moisturizer. You're getting a superficial, temporary relief and improvement in texture. True hydration happens on the lymphatic level. If you have lymph stagnating in the interstitial spaces around the cells, the movement and exchange of fluids to and from the cells is going to be compromised. And in order to hydrate lymph, you need astringency. In other words, water alone isn't going to cut it. You need fruit and vegetable juices rich in electrolytes, because electrolytes, and specifically sodium, regulate intracellular water content. People who consume salt lose a lot of intracellular water because it gets dumped into the interstitial spaces to dilute the brine. I've known you, Connie, for a while now, and we have spoken during many webinars. So I know that you have been on a liquid diet of juices while also intermittently dry fasting every single day. Now, this may be a good, powerful protocol for a short term, but if you're doing this constantly, which I believe you have been doing for as long as a year now, you're actually not allowing the body to properly recover and replenish. The whole point of fasting and fluid restriction is to place the body under temporary, controlled level of stress in order to activate and maximize its recovery and regeneration. But if you are keeping the body under such stress constantly, you're missing an important part of the equation with respect to the counterbalance that's necessary for the fasting to have its intended healing effect. It's like stretching a rubber band. By pulling it back as far as it can go, you are creating a tension point, which once released, propels the rubber band in the opposite direction with incredible speed and momentum. But if all you're doing is stretching and pulling, eventually the rubber band is just going to snap. So there's always that maximum stress point that allows for the greatest propulsion in the opposite direction, which in this case would be regeneration. But moving past that threshold negates the whole exercise. It's my opinion that this fasting and juicing routine may have become detrimental because you're not sufficiently restoring hydration. And if on top of that you're also doing enemas, you're likely depleting your electrolytes, as I already explained. My recommendation here would be to stop the daily dry fasting and drink lots of juices throughout the day without any limits for at least 2 weeks. I would include celery, cucumber, cantaloupe, watermelon, and orange juice to restore hydration by bringing up your potassium and sodium. And have plenty of coconut water as well. After 2-3 weeks, if you'd like, you can resume dry fasting, but instead of the daily intermittent fasting, do 1 to 2 or even 3 days weekly. But these are to be done in a continuous block of time. I believe that this small adjustment would greatly help, and not just with rehydration. I'd like people to understand that aside from weight loss and insulin sensitization, intermittent dry fasting is pretty much useless because you need to fast for at least 3 days for you to get anywhere. So not only does this daily restriction of hydration serve no real healing purpose, I believe that it's actually creating a problem for you in the long run. The other component here is the connective tissue weakness due to acidosis and poor parathyroid function, as was already discussed in the case of droopy breasts. Also remember what I said earlier about sympathetic dominance and the impact of consistently elevated stress levels on the mitochondria, and how it accelerates aging and drives bone, hair, and connective tissue loss. Anxiety will cause the mitochondria to dump their DNA into the bloodstream, resulting in an inflammatory response. So you gotta shift gears and move into the parasympathetic mode. Vitamin B12 can be very helpful here because it's necessary for the mitochondrial function. Protecting the mitochondria will keep the inflammation in check, thus helping to prevent the loss of bone, hair, and connective tissue. Even though I don't usually advocate for supplement use, I do make exceptions when it comes to vitamins D and B12. B12 is vital not just for the ATP, but for DNA creation. It's also necessary for maintaining the myelin sheaths and the nerve fibers. So B12 offers a twofold protection for the mitochondria. First is by fortifying the mitochondria structure directly, and second is it strengthens the nervous system, and a more resilient nervous system in turn helps to prevent the breakdown of the mitochondria. I don't care what anybody says, it is an undeniable fact that most vegans are severely deficient in B12. And unless you're growing your own food without chemicals, in a superior soil that's free from contaminants, in a relatively clean ecosystem without air pollution, then you're not going to get enough of this important nutrient. And by the way, parasites block the absorption of B12. Another interesting thing about B12 is that the liver can store it for years. But if you have a toxic, sluggish liver, then you really cannot count on your liver for any such reserves. And based on your first question, as well as my personal familiarity with your case, we know that there are some issues with the liver here, which makes B12 supplementation all the more pertinent. One way we can get B12 into our system is by eating unwashed produce. But if you're buying your stuff at the city supermarket, then you can't eat it unwashed, even if it's organic. For one, you have no idea how it was grown. Plus, most stuff is sprayed with wax and all kinds of crap before it hits the shelves. I end up soaking and scrubbing everything with soap, which means that any B12 that may have been present gets rinsed away with the pesticides and other questionable residues. Personally, I saw a tremendous improvement when I started taking B12. I would not recommend injections. This compound has to get into our GI tract. We need B12 in our gut for the preservation and regeneration of the mucous membranes, as well as the bacterial balance. There are several types of B12 on the market. I would recommend adenosine cobalamin because that's the form in which B12 is stored in the mitochondria, and the body doesn't need to convert or activate it. My go-to brand is the Pure Encapsulations Adenosyl Hydroxy Liquid, which is a combination of adenosine and hydroxycobalamin. Avoid methylcobalamin if you have sulfur issues, and stay away from cyanocobalamin at all costs. It's the synthetic version that's generally prescribed by doctors, which does not occur in nature. It also contains cyanide and is extremely toxic, especially if you have methylation problems. It also depletes potassium and may cause hypokalemia, and low potassium means dehydration. So to sum it up, can this type of dehydration be reversed? Yes. Have I seen it? Yes. Do I think fulvic acid is helping you with this? No. But I don't think that it's harming you either. Fulvic acid is essentially a fertilizer. It is plant food. And much like salt, it's only after the plants have digested, processed, refined, and incorporated that chemistry into their organic structure that it becomes biocompatible enough to be of use to the human body. And the final question from Connie is about body dysmorphia and emotions. I've always had a difficult relationship with my body, but since detoxing, this tendency is getting reinforced and it's hard not to obsess about the physical experience. I am having a hard time looking into the mirror and even more so taking pictures. I am in my 30s and due to my dysfunctional relationship to my body, including shame and rejection, it's difficult to open up to any intimate relationships. There is the tendency of hiding. How can we heal this obsession, worries, and depression on this journey? Unfortunately, this is something I am very familiar with, so I do know the feeling and how debilitating it can be. But this is a psychological conditioning rather than something that's inherently physiological. Although certain neurological weaknesses as well as chemical imbalances will exacerbate and reinforce these negative beliefs about the self, making you feel stuck and powerless to change. If you look at small children and observe their behavior, you can clearly see that children are utterly free and not at all self-conscious about their bodies. Their focus on the body is purely exploratory and curiosity-based. A toddler will stick his foot in his mouth and fiddle with his genitals in public without any shame or compunction. And some children will often play with their feces, smearing them all over their face, and again without any sense of guilt or impropriety, much like an animal would. I mean, if you look at animals, they can be missing limbs, eyes, have mange, and not have those handicaps affect their spirit or loving essence. What I'm saying is that your problem is a learned behavior, and it started with someone else who took it upon themselves to shame and denigrate you. And you simply internalized and took those beliefs on as facts. For example, I was raised by a narcissistic mother who used me as her scapegoat. What's significant about this dynamic of abuse is that the narcissist, who at their core is very insecure, will try to transfer their deep sense of worthlessness onto someone else, because that is the only way to preserve their very delicate, false sense of self, which is but a fragile house of cards. So for the narcissist, this is a matter of survival. In order for them not to feel the excruciating pain of that utter worthlessness, they have to transfer it onto someone else, while at the same time artificially inflating their sense of superiority and specialness. It's nothing more than a coping mechanism. This may not apply to your case exactly, and I don't know your personal situation. So I can only speak about what I know, and I am using my own experience to explain and illustrate how we develop these issues. Maybe you were bullied in school rather than suffering criticism at home, but the underlying mechanism is the same. In the family of a narcissist, everyone lives and breathes to ensure that the narcissist gets their narcissistic needs met. And therefore, every member of the family is a source of a very specific supply. In other words, everyone works for the single purpose of supporting the fragile illusion, or in this case, delusion, of the narcissist's worldview, and every member of the family sacrifices themselves to prop the narcissist up in order to keep them from imploding, or else pay a hefty price. The job of the scapegoat is to reinforce the false sense of superiority by shouldering the burden of the narcissist's shame. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have the golden child, whose job is to embody and exemplify the special positive qualities that the narcissist values and believes themselves to possess. Because the narcissist is so utterly dissociated, they can only experience themselves through the mirror of others. Being unable to cope with the unbearable truth of who they are, they deny and disown their shadow self and project it onto the scapegoat, making that individual carry their shame by unleashing their self-hatred onto another. This projection onto the scapegoat enables them to express their self-hatred without suffering its painful effects. In other words, they use the scapegoat as a surrogate. The horrific cruelty of this is that the narcissist can only feel content when the scapegoat feels bad. And the worse that the scapegoat can be made to feel, the more fortified the narcissist's false sense of superiority. So the only way a narcissist can alleviate their inner turmoil and malcontent is by beating up on the scapegoat and annihilating them. Whenever the scapegoat feels good or has positive feelings about themselves, the narcissist is immediately threatened, provoking an attack. This means that any self-affirming, constructive attitudes and feelings of worthiness are downright dangerous for the scapegoat. So the scapegoated child quickly learns that the only way to survive is to conform to the degradingly warped concept of the self imposed upon them by the narcissist. This is why I have always struggled with accepting compliments. Instead of making me feel good, they would induce severe anxiety, because getting positive attention was undermining to my narcissistic mother, who would immediately retaliate with a barrage of emotional and physical abuse. The other component to this is that because the scapegoat had to accept the narcissist's distorted image of them in order to survive, any definitions that contradict that warped sense of self would be perceived as false and would therefore be rejected as lies. In other words, it didn't matter if people called me smart, talented, or beautiful. I simply couldn't accept it, believing that either they were wrong, misguided, or worse, they were lying to manipulate me. I have to say that the most healing piece of information in dealing with the narcissistic psychopathology was the insight into how and why a specific person is chosen to become the narcissist's scapegoat. Seeing someone who possesses special attributes and desirable qualities triggers the narcissist's deep-seated insecurity and the self-loathing, thus making that person an existential threat. And if you are a threat to the narcissist's ego, you're automatically the enemy and must be destroyed. Because in the mind of the narcissist, it's either you or them. This realization that my mother hated me not because I was defective or not good enough, but precisely because she perceived me to be better than her, thus triggering her devastating rage towards me, was the single most consequential component on my journey to rebuilding my self-worth. Such toxic transfer of beliefs can take a really deep and devastating hold and completely alter your sense of reality. My mother always treated me like I was a revolting piece of excrement at the bottom of her shoe. I was called fat, ugly, repulsive, disgusting, you name it. She forcefully shaved my head until I was about 4 years old because, according to her, my hair was too horrible. And after that, I had to keep my hair really short. I was not allowed to grow it out, so I always looked like a boy. My parents never bought me any clothes until about the age of 16, and everything I wore was ill-fitting secondhand stuff passed down from my older cousins, which of course invited lots of bullying in school. When I look back on my childhood, it's quite clear that my mother went to great lengths to make me as unsightly as possible and did not allow for anything that might even remotely accentuate or enhance my natural attractive qualities. Given all this, it's no surprise that I developed an eating disorder in high school and all through college. I thought that since I was a fat, disgusting slob, that maybe if I lost some weight, then my mother would love me. Boy, was I wrong. Losing a lot of weight only made things worse because it only highlighted the fact that she couldn't do that, thus stoking her rage against me further and making her attacks even more vicious. There was no winning with her because, on the one hand, she belittled me for all my alleged faults, yet any improvements I made were only met with greater violence, disdain, and contempt. But there is a reason why I'm bringing all this up. It was many years later, when I was in my 30s, long after I had gotten over my eating disorder, that I had asked my brother to send me some childhood photos because my boyfriend at the time was curious about what I was like as a child. Now, mind you, I had not seen those pictures in decades. So when I looked at them, I was shocked because I didn't recognize myself. The girl in those photos was the farthest thing from being a fat slob. It was as if I saw myself for the first time, and I was astounded to find out that I was never fat. In fact, I was slim. It took me a while to wrap my head around the cognitive dissonance caused by the stark contrast between the evidentiary data in front of me and the convoluted inner self-image that I'd been carrying inside me all my life. My mother had me so brainwashed and so messed up in the head that my eyes would see a fat person both in the mirror and in the pictures. My actual physical perception was altered and distorted to reflect that inner conditioning, rather than showing me the objective reality of what I truly looked like. So what I want to stress here, Connie, is that your perception doesn't reflect what is, but is instead a twisted projection. What's worse is that most likely you have based your self-worth on someone else's skewed and grotesque perception, that wasn't even of you but of themselves, which they then projected onto you, so that you would carry the burden of their self-hatred in order to insulate them from its devastating effects. Once you truly understand this, then you can finally give yourself the permission to dump this baggage that was never yours to begin with. Remember that the narcissist wouldn't have singled you out as their scapegoat if you didn't threaten their sense of self. And the only way you could pose such a threat was by being special, unique, beautiful, and most importantly, better than the narcissist's innate perception of themselves. One of the damaging consequences of such toxic conditioning is that it instills the belief that you're only acceptable if you look a certain way. Like when I thought that if I got really skinny, my mother would find me less objectionable. You start to believe that you cannot be loved until you have achieved a certain level of perfection. And so you spend your life in suspended animation, unable to move forward, while single-mindedly devoted to the pursuit of that elusive perfection, because you have convinced yourself that you're not ready to participate in life and enjoy its rewards such as love and success until you look like that picture in your head. Of course, this is complete hogwash. For me, it took coming to terms with the fact that I am not a stunner, and that's okay. Not everyone is physically beautiful. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the planet's population are ordinary looking. And yet it doesn't stop them from being loved, happy, and fulfilled. Moreover, after I looked closer at the lives of famous people who are considered gorgeous and sexually desirable by the current societal standards, I realized that most of their lives are a hot mess, including their romantic relationships. Ergo, there is no correlation between beauty and fulfillment. You don't need to be beautiful to matter or to accomplish great things in life. Besides, looks are fleeting because time and aging are the great equalizers. And no matter what we may start out as, we all end up toothless with blotchy, shriveled up skin, saggy ass, and gray, thinning hair. Doesn't it then make more sense to pursue things that have a more lasting effect, like creating art or saving the planet or helping others, or whatever else floats your boat? I don't know who said this, but it was something to the effect of that you can't hate yourself into a version of yourself that you can love. There has to be a shift in your definition of self and what makes you valuable. In my coaching practice, I use different NLP techniques together with the power of the unconscious mind to change such beliefs and feelings by rebuilding a person's self-image. You can also use faster EFT, which I have talked about at length. But the key to success here is knowing what to aim at. And for those of you who don't know what faster EFT is and would like more information about it, please check out the webinar I did on it, which is posted on my channel. Matt writes, Dear Ivana, my name is Matt B, and below are several questions that I have been processing recently. Any advice or input you have would be greatly appreciated. I really desire to go on an extended 90-day juice feast, solid food vacation. However, in the past, it seems that everything I have tried, I have not been successful to continue more than 10 days. I get to the point where I have so little energy and I become so extremely cold with poor circulation, numb feet due to the weak thyroid, that it seems near impossible to continue. I also find the cravings extremely intense for something of substance and find myself binging on herbal powders just to feel satisfied. Obviously, I am dealing with absorption issues, but can you explain any more of the value behind juicing to clean the system, as it often seems like my bowel movements are more healthy when I include fiber? Is it possible that a smoothie feast could accomplish a similar cleaning effect and break for the GI tract? It has become obvious that I'm working with some intense mold issues. The cravings I experience for anything sweet is literally at times unbearable. Several times in the past, when I feel as though I have finally made some good progress, I have crumbled under the pressure by binging on fruits like dates and figs and bananas. I have always seemed to find a way to justify the fact that these are in the genre of fruit, but then I end up feeling not only terrible, but also struggling through guilt the entire time I am enjoying them. It is a very tormenting process and feels to me as though my mind and focus gets so muddled I cannot focus. I have been on various fungus and mold protocols, including Dr. Morse's Parasite M. By the power of what I'm dealing with, seems like I may need a bazooka or some form of higher power. Any insight into what might help me turn around the buildup from years of emotional eating and binging on cheese and starches? I feel so desperate to change, but head information alone has failed to motivate me to make a difference. Also, somewhat on the same topic, I have noticed that especially when juicing only or eating more watery fruits, it has been difficult for me not to overeat or overdrink. Can you address the power of the subconscious, and do you have any suggestions for reprogramming? I am very aware that overeating in my childhood was a way that I found to feel loved. I also feel that some of the challenges on this mountain of cravings revolve around the lack of good hobbies and result from the lack of play and meaningful work in my life. Do you have any insight in ways to see opportunities and to cultivate creativity in the area of life's purpose and destiny? Thank you so much for taking time to review these questions. Much love and peace. All right, so there's obviously a lot to unpack here. The first thing I want to say is that drinking smoothies will not give you the same result in gut cleansing as juicing, because blending is only slightly better than chewing in that it simply crushes the fiber but does not eliminate it. And by the time that smoothie gets to your large intestine and all the water has been removed from it, what you're left with is pretty much the same product you would have if you had eaten your fruits and vegetables whole. Another thing to keep in mind is that in order to cleanse the entire GI tract, as much as half of your juices should come from vegetables. The reason for this is that fruit juices are almost entirely absorbed in the small intestine and do not travel the entire length of the GI tract. You're not going to have regular bowel movements on fruit juices alone. And if you're not having bowel movements, then what are you cleansing? Personally, I really like the combination of celery and beetroot for colon scrubbing. And I also like to add apple and lemon for taste. It's also important to include binders like the GI broom in order to pull and absorb all those stuck-on residues off the intestinal wall. The weakness and numbness you experience are due to poor adrenal function. When I put people on a solid food vacation, I make sure to prepare them properly. This means that you have to start working on your adrenals at least a month before you go on the juice feast. You're going to need herbs, and you may even need glandulars. And it's important to continue taking these adaptogens throughout the entire fast. Remember that adrenals are responsible for the electrolyte balance. So if you are not producing adequate mineral corticosteroids, your sodium-potassium balance is going to be out of whack, affecting your blood pressure, causing fatigue, muscle spasms and cramps, as well as a lack of muscular contraction, which can manifest as stiffness. Since potassium is necessary for proper nerve function, not having enough can weaken nerve signals, resulting in numbness and tingling. Since you sent me your eye photos, I can see that you have nerve rings in your peripheral/lymphatic zone, which would also contribute to poor circulation. Potassium helps to regulate blood flow to the muscles, and when it's abnormally low, it causes the blood vessels to contract, which diminishes blood supply to the muscles. What's more is that when muscle cells don't get enough oxygen, they can rupture and leak, causing the breakdown of tissues that can be quite uncomfortable and even painful. This means that having potassium out of balance can actually cause muscle damage. And if that weren't enough, low potassium has also been shown to impair insulin production. And since the body can only use sugar for energy, if you can't bring glucose into the cell, then where is your energy going to come from? But unlike the previous case we discussed, where hypokalemia was due to severe potassium loss as a result of metabolic acidosis, on a juice feast, you're getting plenty of sodium and potassium from the juices. The issue here is utilization, which is controlled by the adrenal glands. So you have to support your adrenals to ensure that you're making adequate aldosterone to maintain blood pressure and keep your electrolytes in check, as well as to ensure that you're producing enough cortisol and adrenaline to keep you going. Do not be afraid to take herbs on a solid food vacation. I recommend the GI Renew formula along with the kidney and lymphatic herbs. The lymphatics should be either in capsules or in powder form. Everything else can be in tinctures. Mimosa pudica also helps to remove mucoid plaque, but I only see this when I take it along with the GI broom. It sounds like your cravings are most likely due to parasites. I'd say more so than the emotional issues. But the thing about parasites is that they are really picky eaters because they have a very specific diet. I mean, if I keep putting kale into my cat's bowls instead of meat, they're going to starve, even though technically I'm feeding them. So you may be putting food into your body, but if it's not what feeds the critters you've got living inside you, they're going to stay hungry. And they're going to let you know about it. And that's why when people go on a raw fruitarian or vegan diet, they can eat till their stomach is so full that it's ready to pop, yet they will still feel ravenous. So it's very important to snuff out and vacate those vermin, or they're going to drive you nuts, especially fungus, which is much more pervasive. There are at least 30 known strains of fungus that can colonize the human body, and different strains like to eat different things. Some prefer cheese, while others may want bread. Or you may have the type that likes donuts and cookies, or yet another one that's really into potatoes, or yet another one that's into rice, or still another one that's into chocolate. And because fungus is systemic, getting rid of it can be a very long and arduous process because you are literally fighting an army. Now, Dr. Morse's Parasite M is okay, but it is rather slow going and you have to take a lot of it. In my opinion, it's not nearly strong or vicious enough to give you notable relief within a reasonable time frame. Through years of experimentation and trial and error, I have devised an antifungal protocol that's really powerful and effective, especially when you're up against systemic candidiasis. To show you just how effective it is, I'm going to share a personal story. My fungus happens to love cashew cheese. So that is a craving that has often been my downfall. 5 days into this protocol, I was grocery shopping, and cashew cheese, which is normally pretty expensive, happened to be on sale at my local Whole Foods. So, dang it, I couldn't resist it. I bought it, I was really excited to take it home and eat it. But as excited as I was about scoring a great deal, when I put it in my mouth, I found it so unappetizing that I was actually feeling queasy. No worries, I really tried to get into it. I took a few more bites, but having taken a few more bites, I had to give it up because I just couldn't stomach it. And so I ended up throwing it away. So in a matter of 5 days, I went from intensely jonesing for cheese, where I just had to have it, to going, oh man, this is kind of gross. So I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. The power of this protocol lies in the combination of the following ingredients, and you're going to need all of them for maximum effect. As a standard base, I use the Spirit of Health Parasite Powder, which is a broad spectrum formula. The important antifungal herb it contains is paw d'arco. So you can either take it as a part of a broad spectrum formula like Moore's Parasite M or the one I just mentioned, or you can take it as a standalone. The next key ingredient is undesolenic acid, which is a long-chain fatty acid derived from castor seed. Undesolenic acid is also a compound that naturally occurs in human sweat. The best brand for this product is called Formula SF722 by Thorne Research. Here it is. Undesolenic acid inhibits the growth of fungus, and it is your best weapon in attacking systemic candidiasis. The recommended dose here is 5 soft gels twice a day, so 10 total. But you can increase the dose to 3 times daily. However, this can cause some serious die-off, so I would take a couple of weeks to work up to that amount. Then you're going to need caprylic acid, which is a medium-chain fatty acid derived from coconuts. The brand I use is called Horbach, as you can see here. Both caprylic and undesolenic acids are pretty powerful on their own, but even more so when they're combined together. Then the next thing is berberine. Berberine is a chemical found in herbs like golden seal, gold thread, Oregon grape, and barberry. And it's not just a potent antifungal and antibacterial agent, but it's also great for reducing inflammation, high cholesterol, and treating diabetes. I use the brand called Doctor Recommended Supplements. Here it is. I like it because it contains 0 fillers and preservatives, and it also contains royal jelly, which is a powerhouse of nutrition. Olive leaf extract that's at least 40% oleuropein is another powerful antifungal, antibacterial, and antiviral. You'll also need to add grapefruit seed extract, not grape, but grapefruit, and oil of oregano. The next 2 ingredients are really special. The first is pomegranate peel powder. Not seed and not fruit, but the peel. Aside from killing all kinds of bacteria like staph, the real superpower of pomegranate peel is that it kills black mold, which is notoriously difficult to eradicate from the body. It's also excellent for general detox. It's great for acne, rashes, sore throats, cough, and it has anti-aging benefits that include wrinkle prevention. And finally, the star of the show is Boswellia serrata. Boswellia is a frankincense extract, and what makes it so special is that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, which means that its impressive antiparasitic, antiviral, and antifungal properties also extend to the brain. And yes, we do have fungus and other parasites like protozoas and worm larvae in the brain, and Boswellia can get at them. Boswellia also lowers inflammation and swelling in the brain. It regenerates and regrows brain cells. It alleviates headaches, treats symptoms of arthritis, improves cognitive function, reduces biofilm generation, helps to restore epithelial lining of the intestine, is an anti-cancer agent, and protects the liver. There are actually many more benefits, I just can't remember them all. That's how great Boswellia is. When buying Boswellia, be sure to get the brand that contains at least 60% boswellic acid, because that is the active ingredient that gets the job done. This brand that I use is called Tonic. It has 85% boswellic acid, but it also has some ingredients I'm not so thrilled about, like magnesium stearate and silicon dioxide, which is not ideal, but the benefits here outweigh the flaws. So if you were looking for a bazooka mat, here it is. I do want to reiterate that for maximum efficacy, you'll need to combine all of the above: paw d'arco, undeselenic and caprylic acids, berberine, olive leaf extract, grapefruit seed extract, oil of oregano, pomegranate peel, and boswellia. Take the indicated doses 2-3 times per day, and you should double the dose during the full moon, because parasites come out of hiding during the full moon and become more active, which makes it easier for us to get at them. I have a full soup to nuts parasite protocol that you can purchase, which includes special tricks and powerful herbs that will snuff out all the worms and yeast that you can possibly have. Now, what concerns the emotional aspects of eating and how the subconscious mind is involved, I have already talked about this at length in 2 other videos that combined are at least 5 hours long. So I simply cannot go into that level of detail here, as this video is already too long and I'm running out of steam. But do watch my webinars on healing addictions and faster EFT, as well as the video I did about the biochemistry of binge eating, because gut dysbiosis and chemical imbalances in neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin also play a big role in cravings. In the biochemistry of binging, I give you solutions to balancing out your neurotransmitters with herbs and probiotics. When it comes to the behavioral aspect, there are many different ways you can reprogram eating habits, but not all of them can be applied in every case. This requires a personalized approach that involves a deeper dive into the individual's unique history, because our pathological habits developed in the context of a specific family structure as well as societal culture, which is why I have my clients fill out an assessment form that consists of about 30 questions, like, if food were a person, who would it be? How would you envision them and how would you feel about them? What do you like about eating? What do you dislike about eating? If your favorite foods ceased to exist, how would you cope with your life and deal with the world? How would your life be affected by this? What will you not be able to do? What do you feel you're going to miss out on? And so on and so forth. I think you get the picture. And this information gives me a rough map of your unconscious, allowing me for a more precisely targeted approach. Depending on how you perceive the world and the primary mode through which you process information, be it kinesthetic, visual, or auditory, some techniques may work for you while others are going to fall flat. So again, I would have to have a deeper personal conversation with you to customize a technique that would work for you. But to give a general example, reframing can be quite effective for many individuals. When people give up certain foods, they perceive this as deprivation. Their suffering is based on the idea that they're missing out on something special, which is felt as a loss that leaves a void in their life. But deprivation can be viewed in a couple of different ways. The first has to do with what you deprive yourself of by not having something, like the tasty, addictive foods. For example, by not having cheese or pasta or rice or pizza or steak, you're depriving yourself of the carnal sensory pleasure. But another way of looking at this is examining what you're depriving yourself of by having the tasty but harmful foods that you enjoy. By giving into temptation, you may be depriving yourself of health and vitality. If you have a life-threatening disease like cancer, you may be depriving your children or your significant other of a parent and a partner, as well as depriving yourself of precious time with them. Or you may be depriving yourself of pain-free body or even mobility if you have neurological conditions like Parkinson's, MS, or ALS, and so on. Often when people do this cost-to-benefit analysis, it becomes easier for them to make the right choice and stick to it. Since the blueprint of our unique dysfunction is created and stored in the unconscious stratum of the mind, that's the level we have to go to and operate within in order to create changes. The difference between the conscious and the unconscious is vast and can be likened to the difference between dry land and the bottom of an ocean. Our normal waking awareness, in this case, is dry land territory. So to be able to navigate the depths of a deep, dark, and largely foreign to us ocean, we need special equipment. Something like the psychological equivalent of diving gear. Because obviously we can't operate underwater as we do on dry land. Because there is no walking, no running, and certainly no breathing. What I'm getting at is that unless you understand how to operate within the element of the unconscious, you're not going to get results. The main thing that makes the unconscious different is that it is not literal, but is largely constructed from symbols. Its terrain is made up of metaphors and pictures. It is the part of the mind that dreams at night. And to engage it, we have to speak its language. I have recently read a book by Glenn Livingston called Never Binge Again. He came up with an interesting technique that directly engages the unconscious. I really like his concept and the book, the Kindle edition of which, by the way, you can get for free if you have Amazon Prime. The idea is that when you binge, it's not you who's doing it, but a ravenous monster that resides inside you. Livingston calls it the inner pig. When you imagine this creature, make it as disgusting as possible. Mine, for example, is a smelly wild hog that's foaming at the mouth, and it's got one eyeball that's hanging out of its socket, And it's also got these gaping wounds that are rotting and full of pus and maggots. Now, if you're familiar with the work of Eckhart Tolle, then you know that he talks about the pain body in his books. And this inner monster can be a composite entity that is a combination image representative of the hunger that's driven by emotional pain, as well as the various parasites that reside inside us and are always wanting to be fed. It's important to realize that the pig does not care about you or your health. It is a bottomless pit of hunger and a gaping hole of need, and it's using and manipulating you to satisfy its base desires. So it's not you who has the cravings, but the pig that can never get enough slop and wants you to always binge. This means that you're not fighting yourself here, but a completely separate entity. And this pig is very cunning and very good at getting you to break your promises and commitments. So when you do fight this monster, you can fight really dirty and show it no mercy, because this is a game of survival where there can only be one winner. In other words, it's either you or the pig. You can kick it and you can beat it up, you can lock it up in a cage and throw away the key, you can feed it poison, or you can starve it to death. Because let's face it, if it's dead, then it can't be hungry and it can't crave anything anymore. The important aspect of this is that when faced with cravings, you use your imagination to enter a light trance state by creating these movies and images in your head. Because a craving, in essence, is also a state of trance. So you'll be shifting from one trance into another. And this works on the deep unconscious level and has a real capacity to change your feelings, because feelings are the result of thoughts and our beliefs about these thoughts. I recommend that you get the book because there's a lot more to this very interesting concept. And another book you might want to check out is titled This Is Your Brain on Parasites by Kathleen McAuliffe, which provides some very scary insights into how parasites can manipulate our behavior. Now, that alone might be enough to keep you from going back to certain foods. Though I gotta warn you, this stuff will give you nightmares. As far as living your purpose and destiny goes, you need to figure out what you're passionate about and then act on that excitement to the best of your ability till you can take it no further without any assumption, expectation, or insistence as to what the outcome ought to be. This is Bashar's passion principle. Start small. It doesn't have to be some overarching, penultimate, grand theme. It can be as simple as riding a bike along the river each morning, or sitting outside for 20 minutes with your dog, or meditating. The key here is instilling the vibration of joy and maintaining it, because it is that energy that aligns and anchors you within your true core self. Our true core self is what Marianne Williamson calls the undeletable file, which is our highest frequency God essence. And it's in that alignment where true magic exists. It is from that magnetic alignment that incredible gifts manifest. Understand that you're already manifesting constantly. Everything in your perception, as far as the eye can see, has been woven out of your own energy. The difference is that when you're out of alignment, so are the things that manifest. Chaotic, dissonant energy crystallizes into chaotic, unpleasant events. Use joy and excitement as well as contentment and peace. Because when I say follow your excitement, I don't mean that you should be bouncing off the walls, but do use those positive states of being as the compass that points to your true north. And make it a point to do the things that generate those positive states of being as much as possible, because that's what gets you back into alignment, that manifests harmony and magical synchronicity, including robust physical health. I hope that helps you. All right, so I'm going to do one more, and then we'll wrap this session up. The final question I'm going to read is from Nancy. And Nancy says, I am suffering from a condition called Asherman syndrome. It means growth of scar tissues in the uterus, which is preventing me from becoming pregnant. I had a D&C a few years back, and since then my periods had become very light. I just bleed for about 1 day and spotting for 1 day. Since 1 year, my husband and I have been trying to conceive, and after no luck, we consulted the doctor, and after a set of tests and ultrasounds, Asherman's was detected. I am a 30-year-old, otherwise healthy woman. My gynecologist says there aren't any medicines for this condition, and surgery is the only way out. However, even that isn't 100% effective, as the scar tissue can grow back. Please advise me a method to dissolve these scar tissues on their own. I'm not very keen on surgery since the success rate isn't very high in spite of it. Looking forward to the resolution. Many thanks in advance. All right, so I'm going to channel Dr. Morse here for a minute with respect to the body and its simplicity. And by the way, if you're ever unsure as to what to do about any condition, get back to the basics. And the basics are as follows. The body is nothing more than a collection of cells that are serviced by two fluids, blood and lymph. Blood is the so-called kitchen that brings in oxygen and nutrition, whereas lymph is the proverbial bathroom, which cleans the cells by removing acidic byproducts of cellular activity. And there are also two sides of chemistry, alkaline and acidic. So which side of chemistry would you say is more likely to burn and scar tissues? Acids, of course. Now, don't get me wrong, a really strong base like bleach, ammonia, or lye will also cause damage. But it is much less likely that the cause of your problem is alkalosis. As we already said, the pH of blood is 7.4, and it's very stringently controlled by the body. Because if it drops by more than half a percentage point below 7.35, then very bad things start happening and death is imminent. This is why blood is not a very good indicator of one's level of health or disease, because blood is always protected and maintained in an optimal state of balance. Lymph, on the other hand, as a lipid-based fluid, can take a hit, because lipids can neutralize acids. So if there is ever a problem in the body, in the vast majority of cases, it's a lymphatic problem, not a blood problem. Every cell is like a separate country that stands alone and is surrounded by the interstitial space. And it is through these interstitial spaces that both blood and lymph service the cells. When our eliminative organs stop working properly, the cellular waste, instead of being carried via the lymphatic vessels to the kidneys, starts to accumulate in the interstitial spaces until the buildup reaches a critical point where there's no more flow in and out of cells. And those stagnant acids start to break down cellular structure and alter cell function. So for you to be getting scarring of tissue, you have to be extremely acidic. Another thing you mentioned is having had the D and C. And even though you provided no context or additional details, I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that the surgery was the result of a miscarriage rather than an abortion. which gives me a clue about the state of your pituitary gland, because inability to conceive or carry to term is a pituitary issue, and so is your period. So not only are you acidic in your reproductive organs, but you're acidic through and through, all the way into the head. And this case is a perfect example of where correlation does not equal causation. It may seem to you that D&C started this whole nightmare for you, but the truth is that the cause of your problem is systemic acidosis. And the problem that suppressed your pituitary, resulting in the loss of pregnancy, is the same problem that's causing the scarring of uterus. This isn't something that you can treat locally. You're going to have to go after the whole body. The good news is that it is totally reversible, but you have to remove the acids that are burning and breaking down your tissues. Understand that when a tissue is weak, the body will create scarring to thicken and fortify that weak structure. So how do you fix this? First thing you do is go on a hydrating, alkaline diet of raw fruits, because you cannot continue to keep acidifying the body any further. You're also going to need to open up all the pathways of elimination. This means bowels, kidneys, lungs, and skin. This also means that you are going to need herbs, juice feasting, enemas, and dry fasting. Aside from the bowel cleansing herbs and herbs for the kidneys, you're also going to need adrenal herbs, because adrenals control elimination both through the kidneys and the GI tract. I would also recommend Dr. Morse's pituitary formula or the female reproductive formula. You can actually alternate these two because they have a lot of crossover herbs. You should also be taking lymphatic herbs to help you break up all that stagnant lymph. Start with powder or capsules, as this will mostly act on the intestinal wall, helping you to pull waste and stagnant lymph out of the GI tract. And once you get your kidneys filtering, then you can incorporate lymphatic tinctures, which are more systemic with a broader scope of action. The next thing I would recommend is douching with the Hilal tea. Dr. Morse developed this formula specifically for atypical cervical cells, and I would do this twice per day, morning and night. You want to get the tea up into your body as far as possible, and then you want to retain it as long as you can. If you have pain, I would do some castor oil packs for that. My other piece of advice is to put babies on the back burner for now. You don't want to get pregnant until you have cleaned up your body. Otherwise, you'll be passing on your toxic lymph onto the baby. That is, if you're even able to get pregnant. I hope this helps you, Nancy. Now, I'm going to have to wrap this up because I'm running out of juice. And if you would like to have your questions answered in a video, you can email me your questions and I'll do my best to answer them as comprehensively as possible. And if you enjoyed this Q&A, please like, share, and subscribe.